record. Okie dokie. So today we're talking about the Enlightenment, deism, and Ben Franklin, and a little bit of the Salem witch trials. Because it's fun, I don't want to talk about it. And I think the last thing I'll cover is the 5 areas that your textbook mentions, 5 distinct areas of the colonies and sort of their population breakdown and their economic breakdown. Your textbook hits that really hard. And so I just want to make sure that you have that information for your exam, for your quiz and for your exam. So just going to hit that again really leply. Okay, and then the readings. The readings this week, I think you had 2 Jill Lepore articles, both about Ben Franklin, I guess. One was about Ben Franklin himself and his writings, and the other was about his sister. Full disclosure, I didn't read the second one, so I couldn't make it through it. I finished the Creed. I finished it last night, barely. I was falling asleep when I was finishing it, so I didn't make it through the second one, but we could talk about the first one if you want. That's fine. Anyway, it was about Ben Franklin, and I like Ben Franklin. He's my favorite founding father. So anyway, let's get into that. First, the Enlightenment. Your book touches on it just slightly. It's not a lot exactly about the whole Enlightenment period, but here we go. The Enlightenment is basically, it's an intellectual movement set up by, intellectuals and philosophers, those sorts of people. It is also known as the Age of Reason, the Age of Enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same thing. Basically, it is a cultural movement of intellectuals. They focus on things like liberty, human dignity, progress, individualism, things of that nature. They are basically, the whole idea here is that they're applying the scientific method to culture and society, all parts of it. Hang on, somebody's coming in. All parts of it. Politics, daily life, all of it. Religion, they apply the scientific method to most parts of daily life. Okay, so the reason that we have to talk about the Enlightenment is that it plays a huge role in the shaping and the founding of America, mainly because most of our founding fathers were part of the Enlightenment movement, and they were very influenced by the Enlightenment time period itself. Okay, anyway, it shows up, the Enlightenment ideals, they show up in all of our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, all of those things have Enlightenment ideals written into them. So it's important. Okay, curious, well-educated, well-read people who are no longer willing to just accept biblical traditional explanations of the universe, basically, is what is happening here. We get out of the out of the Age of Reason, we get the scientific revolution because we get the scientific method. So we get philosophers out of this, New Age philosophers, specifically guys like Kant, Immanuel Kant, who's, the quote here, dare to know, have the courage to use your own understanding. That's question everything, basically. So that sort of comes out of the Enlightenment. We also get new scientific explanations for things out of the scientific revolution. We get Copernicus, Kepler, we get Isaac Newton, all the stuff that we know about the world, the universe, how it's made up, mainly comes from the scientific revolution and the Age of Enlightenment. We also get, during the Age of Enlightenment, new forms of religion. And the main form of religion that I'm going to just hit on here is called deism. Deism, deism. It's a new form of religion that takes the scientific method to its fullest conclusion. It basically claims that God creates the world. He designed the natural laws that govern the world, and then he is very hands off. And then he lets us do our own thing. So God is the clockmaker. He sets the clock, he makes it, he winds it, and he lets it go, which essentially goes, I mean, you can take that to the extent. So God is not, in deism, God is not involved in our daily lives. He does not concern himself with what you are wearing today. He is not concerning yourself with the car you choose to drive or the person you choose to date or marry. None of that is concerning for God. He is basically the maker, and then he lets us do our own thing. That's basically what deism is. So he has provided the natural laws of the world to help us, and that's it. The rest is up to you, basically. The reason that we talk about deism and the reason that it's important is because most of our founding fathers are deists. They did believe in a God. They believed in a maker, but they didn't necessarily believe in what we would call the quote unquote Christian God, basically. They didn't view, like, they weren't Baptist, or they weren't Catholics. They weren't Protestants. For the most part, most of them were deist. So they had a slightly different view of God and his role in what happens in America, what happened in the colonies, and what would happen in America. So we're, I mean, for all intents and purposes, we're technically a country founded on God-like principles. I don't know how to describe that. We're not technically a quote unquote Christian founded nation. They were believers in God, but they weren't traditional quote unquote Christians. Yeah. Okay. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? I don't know. Okay. There you go. All right. So anyway, most of the founding fathers are deist. And you can see that in the writings too, because in most of our founding documents, there is a mention of God, but it's not the same idea of what most Christians have of God nowadays. It's a slightly different version, essentially. Okay. I know we talked a little bit about Georgia in the last class. So Georgia is another. It essentially was an Enlightenment experiment. James Oglethorpe was a member of the Enlightenment movement and a heavy believer in the Enlightenment principles. And so his whole experiment to reform criminals and help the poor and bring them to America for a more wholesome environment and give them another chance, that is all sort of founded on Enlightenment principles. So, and I know we talked about all they did in Georgia when it first set up. The other thing is probably the best example of an Enlightenment figure from our early colonial time period is Ben Franklin. And I think that's why our readings this week were about Ben Franklin. So Ben Franklin was a very accomplished man. He was a painter, a scientist, a reformer, a statesman, author, inventor. Like he basically did it all, right? He was very well known for being incredibly smart, very sharp-witted. But I think one of your articles one of your readings mentions that he was incredibly smart. He was really proud of the fact that he was really smart, but he had a very, I think, what is the word they used? Infantile sense of humor, right? So he made a lot of fart jokes, essentially. Did I tell you I have the book, the collection of essays about farting? I have a collection of Ben Franklin essays. I think there's 18 of them in a collection, and the book is called Fart Proudly. And it is literally a collection of 18 essays where Ben Franklin talks about how great it is to fart. Yeah. So smart man had the had the what sense of humor of a, I don't know, 9-year-old boy, basically. He thought farts were funny. Okay. So, in fact, that's one of the reasons they didn't let him write the Constitution, because they're afraid that he put jokes in it. So, okay. Um, but incredibly brilliant man. That being said, incredibly brilliant man. For me, he is the best example of American Enlightenment, of the Enlightenment period. Okay, so he coined a whole bunch of famous sayings. There's a bunch, and I know you've heard them. I'm sure they still get used in everyday language. What's a penny saved is a penny earned? No pain, no gain. That was Ben Franklin. Fences make good neighbors. Good fences make good neighbors. Visitors and fish stink after 3 days. I don't know. There's a whole bunch. There's a whole bunch of them. But I think one of the articles, what was it? The Creed, I think, talks about how roughly about 10% of the sayings that we contribute, what's the word I'm trying to think of? It's not contribute, that we credit Ben Franklin with inventing. He came up with about 10% of those. The other 90 he borrowed from other sources, but kind of changed a few words to make it his own, basically, is what happened. Doesn't matter. They still get used, which I think is impressive. Okay. Things Ben Franklin did. He invents a lot of stuff. Mainly he's famous for inventing bifocals, the Franklin stove, the lightning rod. There's all kinds of stuff. The other well-known story about Ben Franklin is the kite and the key, right? Everybody knows the kite and the key story, where he's out in the rain with a kite and the key attached, trying to discover electricity. Yeah, he didn't discover electricity. That's not how that worked. He knew it was electricity already. He's trying to figure out the properties of electricity. Essentially, what he does is he figured out that electricity has a positive and a negative charge, and he came up with the idea for storing that energy. So in about 1710-ish, he came up with the idea for a battery. He invented the battery in the 1700s. I'm sorry, I think that's a genius. Okay, so, we don't get them till later, but he has the idea for them very early on. Also, he is very invested in the public good. That's part of his Enlightenment ideals. He's invested in what's best for the public at large. So he does things like he founds the American Philosophical Society. It's a group committed to the advancement of knowledge. That being said, he also does things like he invents the first ever public library so that everybody has access to books. He himself could not afford to go to college. He was mostly self-taught. So he wanted to make sure that whoever wanted to read and get a hold of knowledge, they could. And so he invented the first ever public library. He also does things like he invents the first ever fire department. Back then, houses are made out of wood. So if your house catches fire, pretty much the whole thing's going to burn. So he invents the first ever public fire department, volunteer fire department. He sets up the first ever public hospital in the colonies to try to help people get help when they needed it. He founded the College of Philadelphia, which we now know, we call it University of Pennsylvania. So he established U of Penn. It's pretty impressive. He's our first ever ambassador to France. He is also a successful newspaper editor, writer, right? We know all that. The Pennsylvania Chronicle, known for its revolutionary ideas during the American Revolution and after. Of course, Poor Richard's Almanac, Pennsylvania Gazette, all those. He set up the first ever transcontinental communication as our first ever postmaster general. He was the governor of Pennsylvania from 1785 to 1788. So later in his life, he agreed to be governor of Pennsylvania. However, that's as high up as he ever goes. He doesn't want to be president. They offered him the job, and he said no. He didn't want the pressure, and he didn't want the responsibility of it. He didn't feel like he was up to the task. So he didn't. He never did. And that was his choice. But since he played such a huge part in the formation and founding of America, he gets to be on the money. So he's one of a few people who is not a president who gets to be on money. Can anybody name somebody else? Dude on money who was never president. Think about it.
Hamilton.
And that's it. You got it. Yes. Hamilton gets to be on money because he set up our whole banking system. He's essentially responsible for the American Treasury Department. So he gets to be on money. Okay. And then Ben Franklin, of course. Okay. So the end of his life, he became very passionate about freeing his slaves. He owned slaves. Harriet Tubman, 2021. That's right. They're putting that back in production, supposedly. Harriet Tubman is going to replace Andrew Jackson on the 20. So I don't know. That started about 10 years ago, but never got anywhere. Trump stopped it when he got in office, but now apparently it's back on. So I don't know. I'm excited. I would like to see Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill. I think that's awesome. She's one of the original OG badasses of American history. So I think it's fantastic. Okay. We'll talk about her later. Okay. So Benjamin Franklin, he's a good example of the Enlightenment period. He is also one of our more prominent and wordy, maybe, founding fathers. He wrote a boatload of stuff. Oh my gosh, he wrote so much stuff. What did your article say? They're trying to collect all of his writings. And I think they've got how many volumes so far that they've collected?
I think it said something around like 48, but that's not even close to being done.
Exactly. Like they found stuff that they didn't even know he wrote. And so they're collecting all kinds of stuff. I don't know how many volumes it's eventually going to be, but yeah, it's in like the 40s now, volumes of stuff that he wrote during his lifetime. That's insane. That's absolutely insane to me. So anyway, good example of the Enlightenment period. Benjamin Franklin. There we go. Next, I'm going to hit on the Great Awakening. Your book talks about it just for half a second. There isn't really a lot discussed about the Great Awakening, but I'm just going to go through it a little since it's discussed a little. Okay, the Great Awakening starts happening roughly about 1730-ish to about 1770. So roughly about 40 years, the first Great Awakening in the colonies. It is religious revivals that spread across the colonies. Your book mentions that it's in the colonies at that time. It's far more likely for a bar to be full on a Sunday morning than a church to be full on a Sunday morning. People were not really invested in going to church all that much. Once they came over from England, they sort of started their own thing, and church wasn't as prevalent as it had once been when they lived in England or Germany or wherever they came from. So we have a religious revival happening in about 1730. Your book talks about a couple of the famous preachers out of that time. I'm just going to talk about two. One, Gilbert Tennant, mainly because he's the first really well-known one. He's a New Jersey minister, and his whole idea is that he claims ministers were teaching, quote, an empty and dead form of religion, and that only by accepting that you are a sinner and opening your heart to God's grace can you hope to achieve salvation. That's the whole point here, is that they're not really trying to get you to like memorize Bible verses or understand exactly what every word of every parable means. They really just want you to be moved. They want you to feel God's grace and to be moved by it, basically, is the idea here. The second guy, and probably the most well known, is Jonathan Edwards. So there's a school in Nashville called the Jonathan Edwards School, actually, that I just discovered a few years ago. I don't know how you base a whole school around this guy's ideas, but whatever. Okay, Jonathan Edwards. Quote, our people do not so much need to have their heads filled as have their hearts touched. See, more of that same, you got to feel it sort of kind of religion, right? You got to feel it. So he has a really famous sermon. And in most of my other classes, I have my students read at least part of it because it's crazy. So it's called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Is the name of his sermon, and it's super famous. It's a little long, but whatever. Okay, so basically his idea is, and it's very descriptive. That's part of that's one of the basic principles of these Great Awakening preachers, is that they're incredibly descriptive, very descriptive. A lot of imagery, a lot of iconography to let you really kind of get an idea of what they're trying to go for, paint you a picture, basically. Okay, so in Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, basically his idea is he paints a picture of what hell looks like, what hell is. And then he describes humans, he describes people as spiders, and that we are dangling over the pit of hell, and that it's God's hand underneath us, saving us from the pit of hell. And that it's God's hand. What does it say here? He says, it is only through God's mercy that prevents us from falling in to the burning flames of hell. That God's hand is there, and he's a grace. It's full of grace, but he is also an angry God. So you have to do your best to make God happy, essentially. So he doesn't just do this. You know what I mean? He doesn't just like
smite you.
Yes, basically. That's exactly it. He doesn't just kind of okay, that sort of situation. Okay. Anyway, it was very moving, I guess, at the time. And apparently he was a very good speaker because it got a lot of people involved in church. So the Great Awakening, this guy, Jonathan Edwards, he goes on to be the president of Princeton. I don't know if you know, Princeton was originally founded as a college to train ministers how to preach in the style of the Great Awakening preachers. So, obviously it's not that anymore, but that's how it started. And Jonathan Edwards was the president for a while there. Okay. So the Great Awakening really does have an impact on colonial society because it challenges people's ideas. It's starting to, at least, challenge people's ideas about race, about gender, about social status, mainly because during these Great Awakening events, they would have these like big tent revivals out in like a field, essentially. It'd set up a big tent and they'd have preachers come and they would preach for like a week straight. Of course, one guy is not going to preach for the entire time. So if you were so moved, you could go up there and speak as well. This included women, Africans, immigrants, Native Americans, poor people, rich people, whoever. It was kind of a all-encompassing, if you want to speak, you can situation, which for a lot of people was the first time that they had heard somebody else speak, like somebody that wasn't in their little group of people express an idea. So is sort of the very, very first little inklings of a Democrat-ish, more Democrat-ish type of society. It's not like they were, anybody and everybody, but they were a little more open to the ideas of other kinds of people, basically. So it's a good start, I guess, maybe a very little start. Okay. let's talk. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's talk Salem witch trials. Okay. It was in the last chapter, but we didn't get to talk about it because of the snow, and I want to talk about it because it's fun. So here we go. And it'll be on your test too. So okay. Salem witchcraft trials. They start February of 1692 and they last until May of 1693. So roughly a little more than a year, the whole thing. It is the most serious outbreak of witchcraft accusations in American history. There were others, but this is just the biggest and the most well-known, obviously. I mean, there's a bunch of movies and TV shows based on it. So, okay. And if you ever visit Salem, Massachusetts, their entire city's economy is based on the Salem witch trials. They like recreate them every year or something. I don't know. It's a lot. Okay. By the end of that year-ish, we've got 19 women and 1 man who are killed. 19 people who are hanged, and 1 guy who's crushed to death by stones. Oh, this is awful. Crushed to death. Okay, so it starts out, the Puritans themselves felt like they were incredibly good targets for the devil. Because they were so holy and they were so pious and they lived such a godly life that they felt like they were a very good target for the devil to try to attack them. So they felt like Satan was trying to actively destroy their city and its religious foundation. They also thought that Satan kept a book and a record of his contracts with all of the witches and the people that he was in contract with. And that in order to join him, he had to sign his book. I don't know. That's still one of the prevalent things. I don't know. I don't know if you've seen, what's the new one? Sabrina, the Teenage Witch. Have you seen the new series? That's the
Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. I'm basically wearing this merch.
Yes. Okay. I watched the first season. I haven't seen there's new episodes, I think, but I haven't seen the new ones. But like the whole first season is basically she's got to sign the book, right? She's got to sign the book to make her deal with essentially the devil.
Book of Satan.
Yes, the book of Satan. She's got to sign the book. So, I mean, that's still kind of a thing that goes on. Okay. The first instance of witchcraft was reported at the home of Minister Samuel Parris. His daughter, Betty, and her cousin, Abigail, who are 9 and 11, respectively, are acting strangely, according to their father. They are, quote, having fits that are beyond the natural. So I don't know what that means. I don't know what that looks like. I have boys. I don't know what girl fits look like, really. So I don't know what that means, or what would be considered unnatural behavior for a 9 and 11-year-old girl. I don't know. But they're accused of witchcraft. The doctor comes and looks at him. He says, there's absolutely nothing wrong with him. It must be witchcraft. So they ask them, who is responsible for teaching you about witchcraft and who has gotten you involved with the devil? They say that their maid, their nanny, essentially, she is a slave woman who is owned by Reverend Parris. Her name is Tituba, and she is from the Caribbean colonies. Historians believe that she may have practiced some sort of African religion, maybe even some type of voodoo, essentially, because that's a recognized religion. I don't know, but obviously something different than Puritanism for sure. And so they basically threw Tituba under the bus and said it was her. Plus, she's a slave, so she's an easy scapegoat. You know what I mean? It was easy for them to say that. And so they asked Tituba, what are you doing? Are you teaching these girls witchcraft? And she actually admits, yes, I'm teaching them some things. She doesn't call it witchcraft, but she's teaching them some things from her home country, from her home religion. Everybody calls it witchcraft. Okay. So they put a couple people in jail right off the bat. They monitor the girls to make sure that they're not continuing to have fits, all that sort of thing. Anyway, these rumors and gossip starts to spread. It spreads throughout the entire city because it becomes a very easy way to say, you know what? I don't really like the lady that lives 3 houses down. I think I saw her in the woods really late at night last week. You should definitely go check on her. It becomes a very easy way to get at people, right? Yeah. It doesn't actually just stay in Salem. It expands. It goes all the way into Maine. They hanged a lady in Maine for being a witch. So it's not just Salem. It spreads out to other areas of the colonies, but mostly centered in Salem. Anyway, okay. There's a pattern to the accusations. It's mainly older single women who don't have children. Basically anyone who really didn't fit in with the Puritan idea of what a woman should be at that time, mainly a wife and a mother. So if you weren't those things, if you were an old maid, you weren't married, didn't have any kids, you probably were getting accused of witchcraft, basically, is what's happening here. Okay. They also use something called spectral evidence in the trials. Spectral evidence is basically using, well, specter means ghost. So you can say things like, I had a vision or I had a dream about this, and you could use that as actual evidence in a trial against one of these people, which makes it very difficult to defend yourself. How do you defend yourself against somebody else's dreams? I don't know. So in one of the trials, the Rebecca Nurse is her name. At her trial, she actually points out that verifying spectral evidence is impossible and therefore should not be able to be used against her in court. She's hanged, by the way, in July. Yeah, they hang her. However, it gets the main guy in charge, the head minister in charge. His name is Increase Mather. That's the Increase is his first name. Anyway, Increase Mather was the judge, the minister. Doubts kind of start to set in his mind after about 8 or 9 months of these trials and accusations. And so on Sunday, he delivers a sermon, and in it he says, and this is a quote, it were better that 10 witches go free than one innocent person be condemned. So they quit using spectral evidence in trials. It becomes a lot harder to convict somebody when you can't use spectral evidence. They move on. Eventually, it sort of plays itself out. They have accused just about everybody in town of witchcraft at some point. 400 people in all are questioned and or accused of some kind of witchcraft. 19 people are hanged. Like I said, that one poor man's pressed to death. They just put a stone on his chest and say, "Are you a witch?" He says, "No." And they put another one on there. "Are you a witch?" "No." They put another one on there until eventually he's just crushed to death. Seems like a terrible way to die. 8 more people were actually condemned to die. 1 was convicted but died in prison. 3 convicted but pardoned because they were all pregnant. The thing is, in the end, a lot of people confess to being witches. Why? Why on earth would you confess to being a witch in the middle of the Salem witch trials?
Probably because you'd be forced to.
Sometimes they're tortured into it, yes.
And then they had a better survival rate, actually, to confess.
Yeah. If you confessed, they didn't kill you. They prayed for you. And you got like extra attention, and they prayed a lot for you. You prayed for yourself, and there's stuff that you had to do basically to cleanse yourself of the devil's mark and the witchcraft and all that. But for the most part, you got to live. So, you know, I don't know. I probably would have confessed. I'm kind of a weenie. I would have confessed. I think I would have. Anyway, okay. So Salem witch trials. And did I tell you guys that the theory that historians think that maybe they were just like high? Did we talk about that? Maybe they were just tripping on funky bread. I don't know. Who knows? Who knows how it happened? But anywho, okay. I do want to talk about the immigration and the economics of the 5 areas of the colonies, because your book hits on that kind of heavily, and I just want to go through it quickly to make sure that you have the most pertinent information about those specific things. Okay, so 1, the population of the North American colonies, the English colonies, increases dramatically. 1700, we've got about 250,000 people. 1770, we've got more than 1 million. A lot of people happening in these English colonies, for 2 reasons. 1, immigration, right? We talked about Scots-Irish, the Germans, right? Pennsylvania Dutch, and African slaves. That's a huge part of it. The other part of it is natural increase. So population increase, people just come here, start a new life. They have access to decent food and shelter, so they have babies. Not just 1 or 2, but 8 or 9. So we have a big population increase. Okay, there are 5 major areas in the original British colonies. And here they are. Ready? Number 1 is New England. We're talking Connecticut, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, that area. This area is mostly white, mostly English, and they are mostly Protestant. Yeah, for the most part. What they do is they fish. They make a lot of money fishing. And they have a very large merchant class because they're good at what? Building ships and trade. So for the most part, their economy in New England is built on trade and is built on their very large merchant class, basically. They have a very low percentage of African slaves. The slaves that they do have are mostly artisans. They work in skilled labor type jobs. So, okay. The second one is the Mid-Atlantic. So we're talking New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, those areas. The Mid-Atlantic region of the colonies is way more ethnically diverse and way more religiously diverse. They are basically the center for finance. That's where all the money gets handled. And the other thing is they have huge, thriving port cities. That's all the coast there for the most part, right? So they have thriving port cities, and they have a very large trade network set up with England and Europe in general, but England. The slavery that they have in the Mid-Atlantic colonies, for the most part, and it lasts longer here, is indentured servants. So more white servants. They have some African slaves, but again, they're mostly like skilled labor, or the term is house slaves. So women who work in the home, in the people's homes, or gardeners, or nannies, maids, house cleaning, things like that. So, but a smaller percentage of slavery, of African slavery, in that area as well. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3 and 4 are the upper and the lower South. So upper South, we're talking Chesapeake region, so Virginia and Maryland. And then the lower South, we're talking about the Carolinas and Georgia. Their economy is mostly built on agriculture which means they have a very high percentage of African slave labor, the highest percentage of African slave labor, because they rely on cash crops like what? Wheat, rice, hemp, indigo, those sorts of things. Cotton slightly, but not yet. We're getting there. Tobacco, obviously, that was a big one. You can't grow all of those things, right? They import the plantation sugar colony plantation model into the Carolinas and that area. So they have a very roughly half the percentage of the population of the upper and lower South are African slaves. The largest percentage are there. Okay, and then the last one, the last area is the back country. That's what historians call it. They call it the back country. So basically, the back country is anything that is not a part of the original 13 colonies. So we're like pushing west, that whole backside of the colonies moving west. By the end of the 1700s, we're starting to push west out of the Carolinas and like down out of Pennsylvania, because, well, we have a lot of people, right? Our population has increased eightfold essentially. So we're running out of room to put everybody. So we start pushing out of the colonies and back into the rest of the United States area. No, it's not the United States yet, but you know what I mean, that area. And historians refer to that as the backcountry. That is mostly settled by the Scots-Irish. That's where they come and they settle. It's not as settled as the other parts of the country. So for the most part, the rest of the colonists refer to the backcountry as savages, because it's mostly Native Americans and mostly Scots-Irish. So there's a lot of tension between the Scots-Irish and the Indians, which plays out again and again and again, and that continues to happen. My God, for the rest of American history, for the most part, but you get the idea. They grow crops, they raise crops, they have cattle, that sort of thing, but they are not. They don't have plantation agriculture. The crops that they grow are basically for themselves. They grow enough food to feed themselves and maybe, somebody else in the community to help out. But it's not like they have plantations and are growing a whole ton of a cash crop. That's basically it. Okay. Most of the cities are growing very fast, and land is becoming very scarce. So we're moving further and further west all the time. Okay. Did I miss anything? Is there anything that you want to discuss that you read and I didn't cover? I know there are a few things. I don't know.
Let me get my book. The stuff on the Salem witch trials, and I was looking through the one with all, I don't know the difference. The small book.
Yeah.
And when I'm going to the page I marked.
Mother will not quit texting me.
Yeah, I was highlighting some of the stuff on their trial. So it was the testimony against the accused witch, Bridget Bishop.
Uh-huh.
And I thought it was hilarious going through them because their accusations were so far stretched. It's like John Cook testified that about 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And then there's another one, testified about 14 years ago. He woke up and saw her over the cradle 14 years ago.
Yeah. Right.
And then he knew not Bishop nor her name, but when he saw her after this, he knew it was her. And that
he
was
immediately recognized her 14 years later.
Yeah, and it wasn't even like a figure, it was like a shadow figure.
Yes.
And then the other one was they bought a cow, was to pay the price agreed onto another person.
Yeah.
This prisoner being angry that she was thus hindered from fingering the money, quarreled with Bly. Okay, like you you're mad at them, so you're like, I'm gonna accuse you as a witch because
That's exactly what's going on there. Yes.
yeah, there's so many of them. I just highlighted it because I
Yes.
was like, that's hilarious.
Yes.
Going through and it's like all of these are so obviously not true.
Yes. There are several instances where they would bring women into the court and have them strip naked so that they could look on their bodies for the mark of the devil. So there's quite a few instances of like, I don't know, what I would call dirty old men who just wanted to get a good look at a naked lady. And so they'd bring them into court and be like, okay, we have to search your body for the mark of the devil. Get naked. Which, what? Yeah. It gets really insane towards the end of it. It gets really insane. Okay. I know there was a couple things in the readings, like the article about Ben Franklin and all of his writings. I don't know. We talked about Ben Franklin and how he's an Enlightenment figure, but he has a quote and I really like it. Here it is. If you would not be forgotten as soon as you're a dead man and rotten, either write things worth reading or do things worth the writing. I just think that's clever. I think that's a good quote. It's good life advice in general. I don't know. It's pretty good. Smart man. Okay. If you guys can't think of anything else, I don't know. Did somebody just ask what time the SI meeting is today? Because I don't know. I think it's 2:30.
It is.
2:30?
Yes, 2:30 to 4.
2:30 to 4. Fantastic. There you go. And I think I posted, I know I did my first class, but I will post the essay question for you. So you can go ahead and take a look at it. It opens on the 8th, like I said. So, but I'm gonna go ahead and post it so you can get a look at it in case you want to start working on it. And shoot, there was one more thing. Extra credit. So 2 different versions of extra credit are available to you. One, after you write your essay for your midterm, you can rework it if you need to. I mean, if you're good with your grade, you don't have to, but you can rework it for extra credit points, resubmit it. It's one way to get extra credit. The other one is, of course, your SI meetings. And then the third one is, I think I'm just going to do the film review thing that I do for all my other classes. It seems equal opportunity to me. So I will post a list of movies for you. They're all American history movies. And there's a buttload of them. I just have a list of about 40-ish. If you have one that is not on my list, by all means, just let me know what it is. So what you do is you watch the movie, you write me a 1-page review of the film. No, you can't count Forrest Gump. We're early American history. You have to do something like Civil War before. So sorry. I'm sorry. I love Forrest Gump, but not a very accurate American history movie. Sorry. Also, The Patriot. The Patriot's on my list. Hate it. It is so inaccurate. It's terrible. Okay, but you are more than welcome to watch it and write a review of it and tell me how wrong it is. There you go. Yes, the 13th, the Netflix special, the 13th. Yes, you definitely can watch that. That's fantastic. I've seen that. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them on there, but basically just write me a 1-page review of, what it is, what the movie says, what it shows, and let me know if that is, if that fits in with what you have learned. Like, is that what you learned about in your readings? Is it the same? Is it the same? Is it vastly different? Is it kind of fitting in with what you've learned, or, whatever? Just a review and put it in context for class purposes, basically. And just 1 page. That's all I need is a page. You don't have to write me a whole paper on it. Just review the movie for me. And each one of those are worth 10 points. So that I'll add to your final grade. Your percentage wise, you know what I mean? Okay.
Is there a certain amount like we can't do, or can like we do as many as we want?
A certain amount that you can't do? I'm sorry, what do you mean?
Like for the review, is there a certain amount like we can do, or can we just do as many as we want?
Two.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. Sorry. Thought I said that. My bad. Okay. Yeah. If you have a movie you want to watch that's not on my list, can you just like run it by me maybe first? That's all I ask. I think I starred my favorite ones, but you watch whatever you want to watch. Totally up to you. There's a whole bunch of them there. Okay. And I will post that list in the class website in the content section, probably next to the syllabus for you. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? You can do those extra credit things all the way up until the last day of class. You don't have to do them now. You don't have to redo your essay right after the midterm. You can do all of that stuff all the way up until the last day of class. Totally fine with me. Because if you get to the end of the class and you don't think you need any extra credit, totally fine. Don't do it. Don't waste time doing it if you don't feel like you have to, for sure. But if you want to, opportunity is there. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? If you think of something that we didn't cover or you have questions about anything, obviously Natasha is there for you guys. I'm here. If you have any questions, please let me know. That's it. Have a good rest of your day. Bye, guys.
Have a good